Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you how to produce a Rammstein inspired track like this. So I've done a couple of industrial metal videos before, but never like a Rammstein deep dive. So today that's what we're going to do. Let's jump straight in. So first off, we're going to need an intro. So I'm going to start with this main synth track is what I've called it. And as usual, this is just a sound that I've made in Vital. Just like a distorted bass synth. So I'll break down that sound in a minute, but let's just program something in. Tempo wise, I'm going 137 beats per minute. Anything around there tends to have that kind of till hammer tempo, and that's definitely what we want today. So we're going for the key of E. I'm actually in standard tuning for once. Rammstein tends to be E or drop D most of the time, so we're going for E standard. And we're going to go pretty dancey. We're going to go pretty fast paced. Like the synths is the one thing in Rammstein's music where they tend to actually get, everything else tends to be on the beat. The synth tends to kind of dance around, so that's what we're going to try and do. Melodically, nothing crazy. They tend to stay around the chugga chugga, just open root notes and minor seconds, but at the end of this we're going to go into kind of like blues scale territory. Like a lot of metal bands, they really do keep it to the open one open kind of riffs, but there's definitely bits of pentatonic minor, bits of like blues scale, Locrian mode in their music, Phrygian. So we're just bringing a bit of that in at the end of the measure. Okay, and to break down the sound, so first of all, this is it without distortion. Kind of like almost like an 8-bit keyboard sound. I'm basically going for like an old school 90s keyboard sound. So a few tricks for you. Firstly, I'm pitching oscillator 1 and 3 up and keeping the middle one at a normal pitch so that we have a low pitch and a high pitch there. This is something Rammstein tend to do so that it kind of feels full. It's like you've got more than one note. You've got a couple of octaves going on there. And obviously the goal with this kind of music is just the bigger the better. It wants to sound huge, epic, industrial. Another trick is super fast attack and release. So it's not it's not got a tail. It's like you can get dancey and stabby, which they do tend to do with their synths, but dancing around with stuff. And like I said, our good friend distortion is a big part of this sound. However, I always, with Rammstein kind of stuff, I pair it with a lot of filtering. Without this filtering, the distortion sounds too modern and just too dancey. Whereas with this kind of subdued high pass and low pass filtering, sounds intense because the distortion is there, but it's more in the background. So that's definitely a trick they use in a lot of their music. All right, now we have this track called Step Filter Synth because it is focused around a step filter, which is just a multi-mode filter. I used this in the 9 Inch Nails video a few weeks ago. And this one is a smoother sine wave sound. You can see there is a bit of harshness, but it's basically just like a really low hum. We don't want anything too crazy. We want a consistent hum so that we can send it into the filter and let it do its work. And again, we have the pitching on one of the oscillators so that it's kind of this orchestra of keyboard sounds rather than just the one. That's a full sound and that's what we want. It's a lot of frequencies going on. So we're taking that and putting it into the step filter, a chorus, some EQ, some delay, and some compression, which you'll hear in a second how much that changes the sound. And for this sound, the step filter is going to do the dancey stuff for us, so I'm just going to program the exact same riff, but simpler. So listen to what a difference that filter makes. I've got it set on 16th notes, so every 16th note, it basically is changing how it's filtering the sound. So rather than it just being a constant like wow, or whatever filtering I'm doing is jumping, you can see. So that's just focusing on different frequencies and giving us this kind of which is very Rammstein. I'm pretty sure they used a lot of these in the 90s and still use quite a lot of them on their recent stuff. All right, so it's getting very synthy and dancey, which sounds cool, but let's tie it all together with some drums. And I'm actually going to start with a shaker. This is just a stock Cubase sound. Whatever DAW you're using, there is probably a shaker sound. Everything's going to be so on the beat and you want something kind of moving around. You want to start with a bit of energy right from the intro. So that helps give us that. And I'm just running that into Fresh Air so that it's got some more high end. An envelope shaper, just bringing down the release. So instead of it being like, it's more like, kind of like a hi-hat. And then the chopper is just doing that even more. If you listen, it sounds quite unfocused without the effects. And then with them, it sounds very like percussive. Only subtle, but it'll help it stick out in the mix. All right, now halfway through the intro, I'm going to bring in this 80s snare, which I also used in the 9 Inch Nails video. I've just bounced it out, but it's a stock Cubase sound. Whatever DAW or drum machine or whatever you're using, this is like the 80s snare. Every keyboard, every drum machine, everything has it. Love it. And it's very, Rammstein aren't an 80s band, but it's like their early stuff had that kind of snare sound all over it. So let's just have that slamming on every beat. And all I'm doing with this is slightly boosting the bass. I don't want it to be a bassy sound, but I wanted it to be a bit less thin. And then boosting the highs with fresh air. That's really going to help it slam when we've got the guitars and everything in there. All right, so now metal kick. Let's under that layer a really hard kick. Using the same metal kit that I use in everything, but I've just bounced out the kick. So this is that kick. However, I like the punch of the Get Good Drums kick, but it's just got too much of the high mid kind of sound of modern metalcore. So it's going on every beat and we're just pulling off the top end so it's not quite as clicky and metalcore and just really boosting the bass. I usually wouldn't give it this much, but with our bass, just giving it a lot of low end because we really just want to feel this one in the low end like a dancey kick rather than a metal kick. That just really wants to hit the sub hard. Like Rammstein have super subby kicks. So that just locks in with the snare, makes it super heavy. Right, before we move on to the intro and get heavier, I'm just going to quickly layer a couple more synths. So we have this one called Synth 1. So like I said, we started by focusing on the kind of jittery, dancey vibe. We've got that laid down. So we're going to program the same riff, but just make it like straight on the beat so that it kind of reels in that dancey vibe a bit more. Makes it feel a little more straightforward and locks in with the drums. So we've still got the dancey stuff in the background, but it's just getting a bit more focused on the beat, as Rammstein should be. And this time, this sound is actually a stock Cubase sound, which I also used in the Nine Inch Nails video, like a lot of similarities there. And it's basically just like a Reese kind of bass, detuned. And once again, using the same trick, I'm distorting it and low pass filtering it so that it's kind of intense but subtle. We don't want to make it too heavy before it drops. But it is intense. And this time we're running this sound into a guitar overdrive, which is something I've talked about a lot on the channel, so I'm sorry if you've heard this a million times. But I definitely recommend if you're trying to make a synth work in a rock or metal setting, experiment with pedals and amps because it can really transform a sound. Like listen to this before and after the guitar distortion. It's like it's clearly not a guitar, but it fits a lot more in a mix alongside a guitar, as you will see when we start getting to the guitars in a minute. All right, let's keep everything going. All right, and let's copy this and I'm going to put it on this track, which I've called Bass Guitar Synth. I'm just, like I said, kind of building an orchestra of synths now. That one is nothing special. It's just adding a bit more sub bass and again, kind of disguising a synth as a guitar. I don't want to give the listener the bass guitar yet because it's going to be heavier. So we're kind of teasing it with a synth that's running into a guitar fuzz. Like this is a very bass guitar-like synth sound. It's another stock Cubase sound and without any distortion or anything. It's just basically some sub bass. It sounds kind of like a bass guitar. So with all this stuff on it, it really starts sounding like a bass guitar. But we want to keep it digital in the intro, so that's just quietly in there to kind of tease the bass guitar a little bit. And you can see I'm adding things like that halfway through so that it starts building more and more as we progress through the intro. You start getting ready for it to get heavy. All right, and last thing for the intro, I'm going to use this super saw. This is another step filter sound. And again, we'll bring it in on the second half of the intro. This one's just going to be like a subtle texture. They like to do this stuff, Rammstein. Like, let's take... You can hear that's a very unique kind of atmospheric sound. They like to throw these things in there. We're going to do a pitch bend just to make the listener uncomfortable. I'm going from the minor third again to make it feel a bit dissonant, a bit uncomfortable. Let's make it twice as long and slowly bend that note up so that it kind of feels uncomfortable. All right, so what this sound actually started out as is the super saw that I used in the Architects video a week or two ago. Just a standard distorted, like trancey kind of lead. And then we're running it into the step filter very heavily, like really taking off the bottom and top end, 8th notes instead of 16th. Then we have ping pong delay to give it even more of that kind of dancing around effect. And then just a stereo imager to make it bigger and a reverb to make it bigger. So it's just this kind of atmosphere in the background, making you a little bit uncomfortable and getting you ready for that drop. All right, that's our intro done. Time to start getting heavy. So let's lay down the drums, then we'll talk about this iconic Rammstein guitar tone. So let's just keep the 80s snare slamming the whole time as well as the hard kick. We really don't want to overcomplicate the drums. I'm going to add more than that, but that's pretty much the base of what we're going for, just a slamming beat. So we're going to layer that metal kick with the digital ghost hat kick sample that I have become obsessed with. You've been probably seeing me use this in every video. That's going to give us what we need for the kick to really cut through everything and just sound massive. I'm obsessed with that kick, and I know that's a very digital sound, and Rammstein have a human drummer, but I swear on their albums, like 70% of what you're hearing drum-wise is not a human. Like he may be a metronome, but no human sounds as digital as that. And I don't mean that as an insult. Like, I think it's awesome what they do with production, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm trying to get this sound from a real drum kit, because every album, especially the first 2 or 3, are definitely heavily layering samples, drum machines with the real drums. So that's what we're doing today. But I am going to be layering them with real drums, or real sounding drums, still using Get Good drums. So we're going to have, again, just with the One Kit Wonder metal kit, some loud snares on every beat. So that's just pairing with the 80s snare and making it sound a little bit less like an 80s sample and just a bit more like a really hard hitting real drum. And the snare, you know, they don't go for a big boomy snare, they go for a light snappy snare. So I'm very much focused on the high mids in the snare and the high end with fresh air. You know, the kick is handling all the low end, so we don't need a boomy snare. I'm going to literally just copy the shaker, keep that going. It's things like that that will make it feel not boring when everything's straight on the beat. You want it to feel like there's something. You don't want it to be noticeable, but you want to feel like there's some movement, so it's not just caveman music. And of course, we need some kind of cymbals. We'll start with a crash. And they tend to go for like an open hat, closed hat kind of sound. So we'll start with this, and yep, that should give us the vibe we need. 8th notes. We'll make them a little louder. So there you go, it's not all digital, there's some human elements in there. All right, so we're almost ready for guitars. Let's just quickly duplicate that Ram synth one, this one. Just to keep some synths in there and have that like lock in with the guitar riff, which is going to be similar to that. All right, and I'm going to copy the first synth that we laid down, this. And I'm going to put it on this track that I've called Huge Bass. And let's bring the whole thing down an octave. So that's going to sound like this. And that isn't really a Rammstein kind of sound, but I'm just using it to make the guitars huge, as you will hear. I've been using that kind of sound in a lot of videos, and it's just basically like my nasty, vital bass sound. Locks in with the guitars very nicely, a hell of a lot of distortion on it. And the intention with that is just to make everything sound bigger. It's not something I want you to notice. It should just lock in with the guitars and make everything sound really bassy and powerful and distorted. I basically broke this one down in the last couple of videos, but I mean, it's essentially just me goofing around with Vital, trying to get the nastiest sound I can. Ugly looking waveforms as a start, super low bassy notes, a lot of distortion, some chorus, compression, reverb. A lot of distortion from Decapitator, just a super ugly sound. And Vital are not sponsoring me. It is the best plugin ever, and it is free. Get it. All right, now that synth is laid down to support the guitars, we're finally ready to track some. This is probably the part I'm most excited about because I love that iconic early Rammstein tone. Hopefully you'll agree I've got something kind of close to that. I just want to jump in, guys, and say if you're enjoying this video, hit the like, subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss all the videos I've got coming up. If you're a vocalist or an artist and you want to buy this track or any of my tracks, they're all below. If you want to work with me one-on-one, you can reach out via my Instagram or email below as well. Thanks so much for watching. Let's get back into it. Okay, so guitars. This sound is specifically, as you can probably tell, modeled after the first 2 albums. I didn't realize until I was like studying Rammstein's production for this video how incredible the first 2 albums are. Like, I love all their production, but as far as actual production quality, those first 2 albums are on another level, like insane production. All right, so let's lay down the riff on the left and right, and then I'll break down the sound for you. And just like with the synths, you can tell I'm focusing on keeping it melodically simple. Rhythmically, there's a lot of chugga and then some high power chords, but very 010 with the notes I'm using, until we've got that kind of blues scale moment at the end of the riff. I had to throw that flat fifth in somewhere because they do use that a lot. But other than that, very simple melodically. Right, and I'm just going to take the guitars we've recorded and put it on this track as well. I'll explain that in a second. So tone-wise, this is very different to what I usually do. Now, I don't actually know what amps the band uses, but I found this PV6505 by Audio Assault really has the sound I'm looking for. Like, I tend to use that same neural amp in every video, as you guys have probably noticed, because to be honest, there's not a lot of amp sims that sound good to me. They all have like this kind of cheap, harsh digital sound. Harsh and digital is kind of exactly what we're going for. So that's why I'm using a different amp today. This just has that sound I'm looking for. Like, I feel like a Marshall plugin would also give me the sound I want. Like, it's kind of almost like an early Metallica sound that we're going for. It's kind of like if you took early Metallica tone and Nine Inch Nails tone and put it together into one. There are a few keys to get in this tone. The first one is more distortion than you would normally use for a metal tone. Like, we're talking boss metal zone kind of really nasty, just high harmonic distortion. You want a really tight low end. You don't want it to be like, you know, when I'm chugging, I want it to be tight. I don't want like a super brutal like chug. I want it to be like a bite in the high end. So the right tube screamer paired with the right amp, I'm using a TS-808 with the tone full so that we're really getting that high end harmonic distortion from it. And you can see I've got the bass at 0, the mids quite cut, and then a lot of high end. And then I'm even boosting the high end a lot more with fresh air, really just going for an insane saturated high end. If you listen to like sehnsucht, the guitar sound on that album is very, very present, very strong in the high end, like way more than most metal. You can see I'm cutting even more mids as well with EQ. So yeah, this is just purely like a high mid kind of sound. And there's just a little bit of chorus on it as well. Can you hear that? Listen without and then with. It kind of, this is what takes it from like a Metallica tone into a slightly more digital tone. It just gives it that like washy kind of digital 90s feel. So that is only a tiny, tiny bit of chorus, but for me that takes this from like a thrash tone into kind of an industrial tone. Just don't overdo it because it can sound messy very quickly. So that's the majority of the tone, and as usual with me, it's not that simple. You can hear we've also got this second track. So I'm not quad tracking. This is just, essentially we have on the left a high tone and then on the left a low tone. Same thing on the right. So we've got, and then I'm putting the same track through. I really liked the high end of that 6505, but I didn't like the lows if I turn them up. So what I've done is use my trusty 14 that I love. And you can see I've just brought all the high end out with EQ. So we've got a very low mid focused and very tight, chuggy sound. Doesn't sound amazing on its own, but listen to all of the guitars together and how much that fills out the low end compared to just the 6505 on its own. Like, even though we're going for a very high-end focused tone, you do want to have some balls to it, so that's what the 14 is doing. When I turned up the low end on the 6505, it was just like this mess of like bass everywhere, whereas this is in the low end, very, very punchy, and that's what we want. All right, and now we're going to throw down some bass guitar. Bass is definitely not a focal point of Rammstein. They just need the low end there. You've got synths, you've got guitars, you've got all these huge sounds, massive drums. So much as I love bass, we're going to just let it kind of sit in the background doing its thing. So we have like a fairly clean, like mid-scooped bass sound. It's really just focused on being like a consistent low end. There's a little bit of high end click to it, but it's just basically low end power to fill out the mix. So for this sound, I'm using Dark Glass just for a bit of grit into the Ampeg SVT3. Very nice amp if you want like a mid-scooped sound. And then we have a little bit of R bass again. Just adding a bit of like artificial sub to the bass guitar so it's even more powerful in the low end. So let's just track the exact same riff but on bass. All right, two more things. One thing I have to do on this track because I love it is an orchestra hit. So you'll have noticed this, especially on the sehnsucht album. And this is like the Y2K Britney kind of thing that was just in pop everywhere. But Rammstein used it a lot, and so I'm going to throw one of those in. It's barely going to be noticeable, but let's just throw in like here as it drops. We'll probably use that more later in the track as well, but I've just got to put that somewhere right now because I love that sound. All right, and then for the last thing, I have this like stuttery synth, which I'm going to use in the background. This is another stock Cubase sound that I'm just distorting and filtering, so I've been loving this sound recently. It's just another 90s kind of like filtered synth kind of sound. So I'm running that into a delay just to get a bit of atmosphere and just filtering again so that we're just getting kind of this mid-range from it. Rammstein synths do really tend to occupy kind of the 300 to 1000 hertz kind of realm. And this one is going to be behaving almost like a percussive instrument as well, like just Keeping things kind of interesting, keeping things moving while everything else is just slamming on the beat. This is adding a bit more movement. So see if you can hear this in the mix. It's only subtle, but it's just another kind of synthy texture that adds a bit more dancey kind of feel to it. All right, and in the verse, I'm just going to pretty much use these same sounds from the intro, but with some slight changes. So that's pretty much all the sounds in this one broken down for you guys. I'm going to show you how the final mix sounds in a second. And I have to say, this one was a complex one to figure out. Like, I have a deepened level of respect for Rammstein's production now. I've always been a fan, but like, I didn't realize how ahead of their time they were in the 90s. Like, they were really breaking ground, like on a mind-blowing level. So hats off to Rammstein and their producer. All right, so let's listen through the full mix. I'll skip through where it repeats. Thanks so much for watching. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Rammstein, early Rammstein. Let's go.